My America as Far as I Can See, Meg's Prairie Diary, Part 6. Meg has had to leave her home behind and is in Kansas staying with relatives due to a cholera epidemic in St. Louis. June 26, 1856. Nothing happened in the night. This morning, Aunt Margaret and I loaded the tub and the wash onto Kip's ox cart as usual. We went down to the stream as usual. We washed the clothes as usual. We are all doing everything as usual. If any riders come by, they will not guess that anything is unusual at all. Here is the hardest part. Press must stay inside. He is supposed to be sick. If the marshal rides by, he must not see Press outside playing. Staying inside is hard for Press, and I am very worried that if the marshal comes, Press will not be able to hold still. Dell is so gentle. I cannot stand to think that she might be sold with her legs in chains. I hate to think how she got the awful scar on her forehead, and I am proud of Uncle Aubert and Aunt Margaret for taking her in. I am proud that we are a station on the Underground Railroad. June 26, 1856. The marshal and his men came last night. George had been watching at the window. There was no moon, so he didn't see the riders until they had almost reached the cabin. George rushed to my room. He whispered, "Marshal!" Dell sprang up. I lifted Press. Dell dove under his feather bed. I put Press down again and straightened his covers. Quickly, I shoved the straw from Dell's bed back in with the straw from mine. I lay down and drew up the quilts. Then came a pounding on the door. Uncle Aubert lit a candle. George opened the door. I heard the marshal's voice. He said that he had reason to believe we were holding another man's property. He said that he and his men had come to search the cabin. Uncle Aubert said, "Search if you must. We have nothing here that belongs to any other man." I have never been so frightened. The men's boots pounded loudly on the wooden floors. I lay shivering. I heard Uncle Aubert tell the marshal that his nephew was very ill. Suddenly, my quilt wall was swept aside. Above me stood the marshal. His lantern shone in my eyes. I got to my feet. I squinted into the light. I said, "Uncle." Uncle Aubert said the marshal wanted to look around. The marshal held his lantern over Press. Press's eyelids fluttered. I prayed, "Please, Lord, do not let Press give Dell away." I looked up into the marshal's face. It was the face of a hunter. He was hunting Dell, to take her back to slavery. I felt anger boil up inside of me. The marshal asked, "What ails the boy?" My anger made me brave. I spoke. I said that my brother had a fever, that he could keep nothing in his stomach, that I feared that he had caught the terrible sickness that had killed so many folks on our riverboat. The marshal quickly stepped back from the bed. He lowered his lantern. Then he turned and went back out to the main part of the cabin. The searchers kicked at the sacks of buffalo chips by the fireplace. They looked behind the oven. One of them poked the barrel of his rifle up the chimney, but they found nothing. The marshal told Uncle Aubert that they would be watching us. Then he and his men left. For a minute, no one moved. Then Dell lifted a corner of the feather bed to get some air. I took my brother's hand. I squeezed it. Press had held as still as a statue. Later, more knocking sounded on the door. My heart began to pound. Uncle Aubert opened the door. I heard him say, "Thank heaven." It was the conductors from the Underground Railroad. Everything was a rush then. These men had been waiting down by the creek. Their scouts saw the marshal and his men come into our cabin. He saw them come out and ride off again. He followed them. Not far away, the marshal and his men had split up to go home. The scouts said they would not come back tonight. Dell took my hand, and Press's. She said she would never forget our kindness. Then she wrapped the scarf around her head. She put on her coat and hat, and she was gone. We watched from the window as her rescuers rushed her to a waiting hay wagon. A man with a pitchfork lifted up the hay. Dell disappeared deep into it. The wagon pulled away. Now I was thankful for the moonless night. June 28, 1856. It is a perfect Kansas morning. The sky is blue, the wind is soft, and Dell is on her way to Canada. Aunt Margaret said that Press could go outside. With a whoop, he ran out the door after George, Charlie, and John. Uncle Aubert hitched Kip to the wagon. He drove to the Van Beeks to let them know that all was well. Aunt Margaret said she wanted to run down to the creek to gather watercress for supper. She asked me to start the Johnny cake batter. I was stirring the batter, humming to myself. I never heard Boots come up the steps. The first I knew that I had company was when a man's voice called, "Anybody home?" I was alone in the cabin. It was too late to hide. Aunt Margaret had not bothered to bolt the door. It creaked open. I gasped when I saw who stood in the doorway. The yellow-haired gambler from the Kansas Hopeful. He stared at me. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the just-in-case red-hot pepper. I said, "Go away!" The gambler grinned, just the way he had grinned at Miss Annie Boone. He said he was looking for Aubert Parker. How did he know my uncle's name? Had the marshal sent him? My head was spinning. I held my pepper ready. Then I heard Aunt Margaret call out, "Jasper!" The gambler turned. The next thing I knew, Aunt Margaret had thrown her arms around him as if he were a long-lost friend, which is what he turned out to be. Aunt Margaret told the gambler to come inside. She came in, too. When she saw me standing with the hot pepper shaker in my hand, she laughed so hard she had to sit down. She told the gambler he had just had a very, very narrow escape. The yellow-haired gambler's name is Mr. Jasper Young. He was on the steamboat that brought Uncle Aubert and Aunt Margaret to Kansas. They became good friends. He will be staying with us in the cabin for a while. Mr. Young is not a professional gambler. He only likes to play cards. He doesn't carry rifles or pistols inside of his cases. He carries a camera and lots of heavy camera equipment. Mr. Young is a wandering photographer. He says we are living an important part of American history, and he wants to capture it in photographs. I wanted to believe him, but one thing bothered me. Why was Miss Annie Boone so angry at you? I asked him. Why did she run when she saw you? Mr. Young laughed. He said that he had taken her photograph. When she saw it, she yelled that it was a photograph of some wrinkled, toothless old lady. But it sure wasn't a photograph of Miss Annie Boone, and she chased him out of her cabin. Mr. Young has offered to take my photograph. July 1, 1856. We have been so busy, I have not had a moment to write. Aunt Margaret and I have been making pies. It seems we will need many when we go to the big 4th of July picnic just outside of Lawrence. I fear my fingers may stay blue forever from picking so many blueberries. July 2nd, 1856. The best thing in the world has happened. Better than twin calves. Better than a new friend. Better even than a letter from Father. Aunt Margaret and I were in the kitchen this afternoon. We were baking pies. It was a hot, hot day. Our cabin was steaming. When the pies were ready to bake, Aunt Margaret lit the oven. The burning wood made the cabin even hotter. We could barely stand the heat. Uncle Aubert had gone to Lawrence. The boys were out collecting wood, so Aunt Margaret and I took off our skirts. We worked in our camisoles and pantalettes. Our wet hair stuck to our faces. Flour from the pie crust stuck to us all over. We wanted to be finished, so we worked fast. Then, bang! Aunt Margaret dropped a whole pie on the floor. I saw that she was not looking at the pie. She was staring at the door. My first thought was border ruffians or a bear. Then I looked, and if I had been holding a pie, I would have dropped it too. In the doorway stood Mother and Grace. At first I thought I was seeing things, that the heat had made me lose my senses. Then Mother stepped into the cabin. She held my sister's hand. "Well, Grace," she said, "we surely have come to the end of the earth." Oh, how we hugged and kissed. I cried. So did Aunt Margaret. I held Grace in my lap for the longest time. My prayers have been answered. Aunt Margaret and I rinsed off with water from the bucket. We put on our skirts. Then we went outside where we might catch a breeze to listen to Mother's story. When Mother saw her baby apple trees planted beside the cabin, she broke down and cried too. Mother told us that Grace had recovered quickly, but she herself was ill for a long time. She said that she decided something while lying in her sick bed. She would never again spend a summer in St. Louis worrying that her children might die of cholera. As soon as Mother recovered, she and Grace traveled up the Missouri River on the Silver Cloud. In Kansas City, they hired a carriage for the trip to our cabin. Father is still in St. Louis. He will sell his business and the house. He is having the furniture packed and shipped to Kansas. Mother asked Nellie to come to Kansas too, but she said she has saved a good amount of money working for us, and it seems a certain Sean O'Brien from Ireland is waiting for her in New York City, so Mother put her on a train bound for New York City. The boys came home for dinner. When Press saw Mother, he let out such a whoop. Mother held him in her lap while she told him that our family hopes to buy a claim near Aunt Margaret and Uncle Aubert. We are going to live in Kansas. Preston shouted out, "Amen!" July 3rd, 1856. Mother, Grace, and I went down to the stream this morning. Mouser came too. We took a picnic. I waded in the cool water with Grace while Mother read my diary. When she read about Griggs Hotel, she said, "Oh my." She read all the way to the end and then said I had done a fine job of writing about my adventures. It made me so happy to hear it. July 4th, 1856. We have come to the Lawrence picnic. Everyone has brought all sorts of food. We will all share our food with everyone else at the picnic. I do believe half of Kansas Territory is here. There are folks dressed in silks like Mother. There are folks dressed in cotton like me. Aunt Margaret finished my prairie dress last night. Some folks are wearing buckskin and others flour sack trousers. There are Delawares wrapped in bright red blankets and men in denim trousers and leather hats. Everyone seems to want to get along on the 4th of July. We are lucky to have found a shady spot to spread our quilts. The Van Beeks have their quilts spread next to ours. Mother, Aunt Margaret, and I put our pies on the long table. I think there is enough food on it to feed the whole territory. I have been sitting on our quilt writing, but Press is pulling me to my feet. He says it is time to eat. He says we must hurry. I say that with our riverboat manners, we need not worry about missing dinner. Later. What a feast! There was barbecued buffalo and deer, barbecued lamb, and fresh ham. Even Dr. Byer and the Peach ladies could have had a vegetarian feast on the corn cakes, mashed squash, diced potatoes, and salads of every sort. There were pies and cakes topped with ice cream, too. It tasted even better than the ice cream at Barnum City Hotel. This diary was to last me a year, but I have only one page left. I looked back at the first pages. I had to laugh at my idea of adventure. I need a new book now to write more Kansas adventures, for I will be here when the cold weather comes. I will warm myself by a buffalo chip fire. I will sleep under a feather bed. I will go to school with Lily in Lawrence this fall. Mr. Young, formerly known as the yellow-haired gambler, is calling us. He has set up his camera. He wants to take a picture of Uncle Aubert, Aunt Margaret, George, Charlie, John, Mother, Press, Grace, all the mini Van Beeks, and me. Next year, Father will be here to be in the picture, too. The speeches are starting now. The crowd is quieting. A man has stepped onto a platform. He is reading from the Declaration of Independence. These lines from it seem a fine way to end my diary. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Amen.